Buckle up, geeks, geezers, and Googleizers. The University of Michigan just detonated a grading grenade. 20,000 incoming freshmen, 6 months, and not a single grade on their public transcript. In short, mandatory pass-fail. Does this radical experiment nurture adaptable, innovative minds? Or does it wrap tomorrow's talent in bubble wrap, just in time for the AI tidal wave? The conversation gets heated, perplexing, and will get you rethinking everything you thought you knew about the future of college and work itself. Hi, I'm your host, Ira Wolfe, and this episode deep dives right into a debate over the University of Michigan's pass-fail policy. What do you think? Is a pass-fail policy a bold leap or a step backwards? Let me know. Share the podcast. Post your comments wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube or LinkedIn.
Welcome to the debate. Next fall, the University of Michigan is doing something, well, pretty radical.
Yeah, radical is definitely one word for it.
Right, so 20,000 incoming freshmen will step onto campus, and for their first 6 months, their grades will simply vanish from their public transcripts. It's just a mandatory pass or no credit.
And there are no opt-outs. It is a massive shift. I mean, we have a tendency to treat a young adult's intellectual development like a corporate balance sheet. Every A is a deposit, every C is a withdrawal, and the final grade point averages essentially their intellectual net worth.
Exactly. It's clean, it's quantifiable, and we rely on that ledger.
Right. It tells graduate schools and future employers who is a safe investment.
But does that ledger actually reflect learning, or does it just reflect an ability to play it safe? So the central question we are exploring today is this. Does a mandatory pass-fail grading policy help students by prioritizing well-being and intellectual exploration, or does it hurt their preparation by creating a fragile culture of comfort and penalizing high achievers?
And we definitely have differing views on this.
We do. I will be arguing that removing the intense pressure of first-semester grades is a vital step. It prioritizes student well-being over superficial competition, and it dismantles a hidden curriculum that stifles the exact kind of adaptability our modern workforce desperately needs.
Right. And I come at it from a different way. I will be arguing the opposite. Mandating this policy actively harms our highest achieving students. I think it conflates normal, healthy academic stress with a mental health crisis, and it just artificially insulates young adults from the demands of a highly competitive real world.
Well, let's start by looking at the structural reality of how college actually functions for an 18-year-old today. There is something in higher education called the hidden curriculum.
The unwritten rules.
Yeah, exactly. When we use that term, we are talking about a deeply ingrained, almost invisible system of risk minimization. By forcing students into a rigid, assessment-driven structure the second they unpack their dorm room, we inadvertently kill their intrinsic motivation.
But wait, how exactly does an assessment kill motivation?
Because it rewards them purely for producing correct answers and staying within safe boundaries. I mean, imagine a student who has always excelled in English, but they are genuinely curious about data science.
Okay.
Under the traditional grading system, taking a rigorous introductory coding class is a massive risk. If they struggle and get a C, that grade permanently scars their transcript. So what does the hidden curriculum teach them?
To play it safe, I assume?
Right. It teaches them to take an easy elective and protect the GPA. Michigan's explicit goal with this new policy is to foster a culture of connection and collaboration rather than competition. They want that English student to try data science without the paralyzing fear of long-term consequences.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. While the intention to encourage exploration sounds great in theory, the execution here represents a much larger, more concerning trend. This policy is a prime example of therapy culture invading the classroom.
Therapy culture? Wow, that's a heavy term. What do you mean by that in this context?
I mean, we are taking normal human emotions like the stress of a challenging curriculum or the anxiety of a looming deadline, and we are treating them as symptoms of a pathology. We are raising a generation to believe that discomfort is somehow dangerous.
But isn't it dangerous when it leads to burnout?
It isn't, though. Psychotherapist Jonathan Alpert points this out clearly. Discomfort isn't dangerous, and a bad grade on your first college midterm is not a mental health emergency. It is simply college.
Doesn't that ignore the massive scale of the anxiety we are seeing on campuses today?
Not at all. But we have to look at the remedy. Sometimes a bad grade is exactly the wake-up call a young adult needs to realize they need to change their study habits or go to office hours or seek out tutoring. Furthermore, the most glaring issue with Michigan's policy is the fundamental unfairness of not offering an opt-out.
Unfair to who? The high achievers?
Yes, you are taking academically successful individuals and forcing them to hide their excellence in the name of collective comfort.
Well, let's follow that thread, because if you are listening to this and you happen to be a parent of a high school senior, you are probably screaming at your dashboard right now thinking, but my kid worked incredibly hard for their 4.0.
Exactly.
So let's look at the actual math of the transcript. Walk me through exactly how you see this penalty to the high achiever playing out.
The mathematics of this are incredibly stark, and frankly, it's baffling that more parents aren't pushing back. Let's look at a concrete example. Suppose you have a pre-med freshman coming into the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, which, by the way, encompasses over 19,700 undergrads and 85 majors.
Right, it's a huge sample size.
Massive. So they work late into the night, they make the necessary sacrifices, and they earn a perfect 4.0 in their first semester. Under this 2027 policy, outsiders, meaning medical school admissions committees, only see a P for pass. They get absolutely zero numerical credit for that excellence.
They pass the classes, but the GPA essentially doesn't exist for that fall term.
Exactly. Now, what happens when the spring semester rolls around? The coursework inevitably gets harder. Introductory classes are over. And perhaps that same student ends up earning a 3.0 in the spring.
Okay, so a slight drop.
Right. And ordinarily, if both semesters carried the same number of credits, they would have that first semester 4.0 to act as a buffer. They would average out and finish their freshman year with a very respectable 3.5 GPA. Under this new policy, that buffer is completely gone. That student finishes their freshman year with a 3.0. You have effectively lowered their standing simply by erasing the reward for their early hard work.
I will admit, the math on that missing 4.0 buffer is pretty compelling when you look at it purely from a competitive admissions standpoint. But I want to push back on the philosophy of the buffer itself.
How so?
18-year-olds to view their freshman year not as an intellectual sandbox, but as a hedge fund.
A hedge fund? That's a stretch.
No, it really is an arbitrage game. They hoard easy A's in introductory classes specifically to offset the C they know they're going to get in organic chemistry later on. That buffer you were defending is actually symptomatic of the exact problem the university is trying to solve.
But
Is a college GPA supposed to be a bank account where you hoard easy early points? Or should it be an accurate reflection of your sustained capability in your major?
it should be a reflection of your entire academic journey.
But if a student is taking classes they already know how to ace just to pad their GPA bank account, they aren't engaging in genuine higher learning. And we should clarify a key mechanism of this policy. The grades aren't actually erased from existence.
Wait, what do you mean they aren't erased?
Michigan has been very clear that they keep the letter grades internally. The academic advisors see them, they are used for athletic eligibility, and they count for financial aid. The student still gets the feedback of a C or an A.
But the external world doesn't see it.
Right, but by removing the external pressure to hoard those public GPA points, you actually encourage that pre-med student to take an intellectual risk. They might actually take that rigorous computer science class without the terror that a B will destroy their chance at medical school.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. That sounds great in theory, but put yourself in the shoes of that pre-med student for a second. You are essentially arguing that they need a protective shield to feel brave enough to take a computer science class.
Yes.
But college is precisely the environment where young people should discover that they are tougher than they think.
Is it about making them quote-unquote brave, or is it simply removing an artificial penalty for curiosity?
It's about how they perceive their own resilience. If we look at the psychological mechanism at play here, shielding students doesn't encourage risk. It creates a fragile culture of comfort.
I disagree.
By mandating a shield against failure, Michigan is implicitly signaling to these incoming freshmen that they are too fragile to handle standard evaluation. When an institution tells you that you need protection from the basic realities of academic feedback, it validates your anxiety. It confirms the student's fear that a C in an exploratory class is something so damaging it must be hidden.
Look, I wouldn't frame it as validating fragility. I'd frame it as optimizing cognitive performance. When we talk about the mental health crisis on campuses, we aren't just talking about students feeling a little stressed before a midterm. We're talking about chronic, metric-induced anxiety.
I completely agree that chronic anxiety is detrimental to learning.
Right, so if a student is so consumed by perfectionism that they can't sleep, can't socialize, and can't synthesize information across disciplines, they aren't actually learning. They are just surviving a sorting mechanism.
But where we diverge is on the mechanism of building resilience. Resilience is built through exposure to manageable stress, not the institutional avoidance of it.
But let's look at the company Michigan is keeping here. They are just the latest in a group of elite schools enacting similar policies. Institutions like MIT, Swarthmore, and Caltech have had variations of freshman pass-fail grading for years.
True, they have.
And nobody in the professional world would ever accuse MIT of fostering a culture of comfort. They are some of the most grueling intellectual environments on the planet. They recognize that top-tier intellectual rigor can and must coexist with policies that ease the initial psychological transition to college. It recalibrates the students' baseline mental health so they have the cognitive bandwidth to actually do the hard work.
You have to look at the context there, though. MIT and Caltech are highly specialized STEM-focused institutions. Their entire student body is essentially taking a universally grueling, standardized set of core technical courses. It is a shared crucible.
So,
the University of Michigan's LSA College has 85 different majors. You have people taking advanced astrophysics alongside people taking introductory poetry. Applying a blanket shield across vastly different levels of rigor obscures vital information.
but let's ask why we need that specific external information in the first 6 months. You mentioned earlier that higher education is a bridge to the workforce, and employers need this ledger. I want to argue that the real world is no longer functioning the way our educational metrics assume it does.
How so?
The traditional linear model of education, where you acquire knowledge, get graded on it, and then apply it predictably at a job, is categorically failing. When you look at Michael Edmondson's analysis, over a third of bachelor's degree holders in the U.S. are underemployed.
Yeah, the mismatch is real.
They are working in roles that don't even require their degree. We see the exact same mismatch globally.
I agree the system is misaligned, but Michigan's policy is the wrong solution to that mismatch.
But look at what employers are actually asking for. When you talk to executives at major consulting firms like Deloitte, they aren't begging universities for kids with better GPAs. They are pointing to an AI future and begging for adaptability.
Right, but...
And as Peter Diamandis points out, 87% of parents are terrified their kids aren't prepared. It's because the target is completely moved. When an AI can ace a standardized test in 3 seconds, grading a human on their ability to act like a slow computer is a useless metric.
True, but look at the Chartered Management Institute data. Employers also feel that graduates lack practical skills and are rarely work-ready. They want resilience, adaptability, and speed.
Exactly.
But if you place a student in an environment completely devoid of objective metrics and real-world consequences for their first 6 months of adulthood, you are robbing them of the opportunity to develop that very resilience. The real world does not offer a pass-fail buffer when you start a new job.
I actually think removing the grade forces the development of the exact skills the real world wants. It cultivates what Silicon Valley calls a moonshot mindset, this idea of massive, adaptive, critical thinking.
Okay, explain the mechanism there. Why does removing a grade suddenly create a moonshot mindset? That feels like a massive pedagogical leap of faith.
Because it forces the student to develop intrinsic motivation. They have to figure out why they are learning rather than just memorizing a rubric. Think about how students are interacting with artificial intelligence right now. The fear is that a student uses ChatGPT to simply write their essay for them, right?
Right, which bypasses the learning process entirely.
Exactly. But what we actually want in the modern workforce is for them to engage in Socratic prompting. We want a student to use AI as a debate partner, to feed it a thesis and say, challenge my logic, find the holes in my argument.
Sure.
You cannot do that if you are terrified of failing a rigid grading rubric. You only take those weird, winding, exploratory paths if you are genuinely curious and feel safe to fail.
But intrinsic motivation cannot be forced simply by taking away the metric. If you remove the grade, you are just as likely to induce apathy as you are to induce curiosity.
You think so?
Absolutely. You are assuming every 18-year-old will suddenly become a Socratic philosopher when human nature suggests many will just do the bare minimum to get the pass.
Well, it shifts the locus of control. During that highly vulnerable transition from high school, they are learning to guide their own education internally rather than constantly seeking external validation from a professor's red pen.
But external validation is how society functions. You brought up how AI is changing the landscape. Many professionals believe a traditional college degree is becoming less important precisely because of AI.
Right.
So if the value of the degree is already in question, shouldn't universities be doing everything in their power to prove the rigorous objective value of their graduates?
By showing a 4.0 in introductory sociology? Come on.
By showing a trajectory. Hiding grades obscures the students' capabilities from the very employers who are already skeptical of their work readiness.
I hear you, but if I am an employer looking at a candidate, I want to see how they handled the transition to college. Did they stumble in their first semester and then recover? Did they excel immediately and maintain it? That trajectory tells me a story about their grit. When you replace that detailed data with a blanket pass, you aren't making them more adaptable. You are making them a riskier hire.
Again, employers don't hire a 22-year-old graduate based purely on their first 6 months of being 18 years old. They look at the totality of the degree, the internships, the portfolio.
Which includes their early performance.
We have to acknowledge the context here. You cannot build a resilient entrepreneurial mind on a foundation of chronic anxiety. Michigan is saying, let's give them 6 months to figure out how to learn at this level, and then we will measure them.
And I am saying that learning how to be measured is the most important lesson of those first 6 months.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, moving from the psychological impact of that freshman transition to the macroeconomic realities of an AI-driven workforce. As we wrap up, it's clear that the University of Michigan's policy touches a nerve because it forces us to re-examine the fundamental purpose of higher education.
It absolutely does.
From my perspective, this mandatory pass-fail policy is a bold, necessary evolution away from an industrial-era education model. By temporarily removing the external pressure of grades, Michigan is allowing students to prioritize their well-being and giving them the freedom to explore outside their comfort zones. It dismantles the hidden curriculum of risk aversion, creating the breathing room needed to develop the adaptability, critical thinking, and intrinsic motivation that our unpredictable future demands.
And while I concede that the intention to ease the transition into college is noble, the policy itself is a misguided overcorrection. Mandating the structure sacrifices the hard-earned transcripts of high achievers and inadvertently enables a culture that treats normal, healthy academic stress as a crisis. Shielding students from objective evaluation for an entire semester does not build resilience. Ultimately, it fails to prepare them for a demanding, highly competitive workforce that will evaluate their performance from day one.
Well, what we certainly converge on is that higher education must evolve. The global mismatch between degrees and actual employability proves that the status quo is no longer sufficient to prepare students for what comes next.
Absolutely. The system is struggling to adapt. We just deeply disagree on whether Michigan's approach is the cure or just another symptom of the problem.
And that is where we will leave it for our listeners to decide. As you consider the evidence, ask yourself whether shielding early grades is a necessary step toward building a more adaptable mind, or retreat into fragility. Next time you look at a transcript, think back to our opening question. Are we just reading a balance sheet of deposits and withdrawals, or should we be looking for a deeper measure of human potential? There is certainly more to explore in the source material. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for listening to Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I welcome your feedback, your challenges, and your shares with your connections, colleagues, and clients. Connect with me on LinkedIn. And remember, don't let the shift hit your plan.